Welcome back to the channel. For all you LS fans out there, this is the video you've been waiting for. An update on my 2001 Turbo Trans Am. If you'd followed the last few videos on this car, you'd know that it went 970 a few times at the track. And that I broke the motor on the last pass. It ended up being a lifter that broke, which caused the oil pressure to drop and scuff the bearings. So I sent it out for a refresh, and in my last Carnage video, I not only told you I'd update on the entire car, but also exactly what it cost to fix this thing. And to help me with that, I have my trusty really long screwdriver and a Home Depot easel pad flip chart. Okay, I'm gonna get the really expensive part of this fix out of the way first, and that of course is the machine shop. That's obviously stuff I can't do here in the garage, so I took the entire long block and I brought it over to AES. That's in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. They do a ton of high performance engine stuff and they assess the damage. And the flip chart says machine shop $3140. Now, this is parts and labor and tax and everything out the door. This is what I paid AES to get back a completely rebuilt short block and totally rebuilt cylinder heads ready to be bolted on. Now, this was a little bit more than I had anticipated, especially when you consider I reused the block, crank rods, and pistons. I called like 5 different machine shops with what exactly this needed before I went ahead with the work, and they were all basically the same price. I'm going to write an article on this video that will be linked below if you guys are more into technical specs. I'm going to list exactly what they did down there. I did a new cam from Martin Smallwood. He spec'd a turbo cam. He asked me a bajillion questions on the car. Came up with a really nice cam, $450. I ended up upgrading the lifters. I was running LS7 lifters, which I think are fine, but they'd failed, and it's really not that much more to go with Morel lifters, which is what I went in with. Total drop in lifters about $230. Of course, you're going to replace the valve springs, even though mine were totally fine, and that was $160. I went with dual valve springs again from Brian Tooley Racing. And then also I upgraded the oil pump. I went with a Mellings 10296 part number, which is a high pressure and volume recommended by AES. Shipping, tax, and everything total, 2 Mana Motorsports, $1110. Primarily all this came from the GM dealership. All the new gaskets, there are a few bolts you got to replace when you're doing a new motor. And then also, really not normally, but in my case, I had to replace the knock sensors. One of them was totally frozen in the block. The other one looked like crap, so I just put 2 new ones in there. My grand total, $400. Now I'd like to note that a lot of these gaskets on the LS engine are totally reusable, but I'm crazy, and although every time I'm like, I'm not gonna buy new gaskets, I'm gonna do what these things are meant to do, which is reuse them, I can never ever get myself to actually do it, so I always buy new ones. Anytime you do an aftermarket cam, or you mill the heads or a bunch of other stuff, you always wanna measure for proper preload on the lifter, and you get that from pushrod length. So I've dealt with this company before. It's Manton in California, and they make awesome custom pushrods, whatever length you want. So I measured it all up. These lifters call for about half the preload of an LS7 lifter, so I went with about 35 thousandths. And yeah, that sent me back 215 bucks, kind of expensive, but they are the beefiest, strongest pushrod that you can use in a stock LS cylinder head, so I had to have it naturally. I bought enough oil and filters for 4 changes, coolant, brake fluid, trans fluid, and then miscellaneous stuff like bolts and whatever, random stuff that goes along with doing a project like this. Added it all up, sent me back about 275. Pretty normal. The grand total coming up next, $5140. That's what it cost me, everything to fix this car, to basically get it back up and running on the road and running good, $5140. Now, in the beginning of this project, I thought I was gonna spend half of that, but I've been there before. This is not my first motor. And at the end of the day, it always costs around 5 grand. I could never get around that. You're always gonna do some upgrades when you're doing a build like this, and I like to call that the while you're in there upgrades. You can't get away from it. You're never ever just gonna put it back exactly the same way it was. So while I was in there, the car got a new AEM wideband. I'd been running one that was like 7 years old. It worked okay, but they came out with an updated version that works with HP tuners really well, so I went with that. Also, I had a 25% underdrive pulley on this car for the last like 13 years. Totally not needed at all. If anything, it reduces your cooling from the water pump not spinning as much and also the alternator not spinning as much. So while I had it off, I'm like, I'm getting rid of this thing. It worked fine, but it was totally not needed when you have a turbo and all this power anyway. I mean, you're gonna gain what, like 2 horsepower? Who cares? Got rid of that, went with a stock size aftermarket balancer. And then I just had to redo the header wrap, which I didn't really have to do, but it looks really nice and pretty now. Also, if you've ever done motor mounts with the entire engine and everything in there, they're a pain in the butt. So I put new motor mounts in there, the polyurethane ones. And my power steering lines used to be kind of like a mixed match hose setup. It was kind of ugly. So I went with a really nice steel braided setup. It was a whole kit and everything. Anyway, total for all this was $540. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the inside of the Trans Am. Wow, does that not ever get old? Right now where the Trans Am is at is, I am breaking it in, believe it or not. I'm at about 300 miles on the new motor and the freshen up trans. And right now I'm not only breaking in the motor, but I'm also doing all my drivability tune, which I pretty much have rock solid right now. The thing runs and drives and idles perfectly. I really dialed in the fuel and timing and all that stuff. Awesome for that. And right now I have it set at about like 10 degrees of timing, and I'm just tuning up to about 8 psi, and that's when the methanol injection will kick in once I have that filled up and activated again. Right now I'm basically tuning the map for everything before the meth, and then after about 700-800 miles of conventional oil break-in and 3 or 4 oil changes, I will put the synthetic back in and then tune the map for the methanol injection, which is a progressive alky control kit. And everything's been great. I've put it to the ultimate test of sitting in traffic for an hour and a half on my way to work, and it doesn't overheat. It runs great. Just a couple little things I have to do. I have to charge up the air conditioning. It is pretty hot out in Chicago right now, getting up to like 90 degrees, so I definitely need that back. And also, I have to fill up the methanol, so that's all ready, but I mean, that's seriously just filling up the tank. There's really nothing to it. Feels so good to be back. Basically, after all the tuning is done, as much as I can get done on the street, I want to get the fueling as close as possible. I'm going to bring it to the dyno. What I do is I rent the dyno out by the hour. It's like $100 an hour. So when I get there, I want to have the tune as close to perfect as humanly possible. Anything I can do, like on the highway, in Mexico, I will do, and then that way I'm just basically doing blasts on the dyno and up in the timing every run until it basically doesn't gain much more power, and then I dial it back a little bit. What I'm hoping for actually is that it makes about the same 902 that it did last time it was on the dyno. It put down 902 wheel horsepower. The only difference is now that I have a way better cam that's actually spec'd exactly for this setup, I'm hoping that it will pull above 5,500 RPM. The last cam, it was on some really aggressive lobes. It was kind of a really dumb cam to run, and it would just die out. Like, it would lose like 150 wheel horsepower above 5,500 RPM. And that's how the car went 970. So I know it's got a lot more in it with this new cam. So I'm hoping for like the same amount of power just pulled properly through the band, and I will be very, very, very happy with that. So what did you guys think of what I spent on the Turbo Trans Am? Please comment below, what did it cost you in a similar situation? You blew up an engine, you had to replace it, fix it, do whatever. This was not my only option. I had also thought about buying a completely forged new motor, especially after figuring out how much it was going to be to reuse all these parts. It was almost feasible to do that. And I looked for months for something that made sense to where I could buy something totally all done, basically the same setup, and then sell off all my good parts. And honestly, it just didn't work out with my time frame, so I ended up going with the rebuild route. All right, with all that being said, as always, thank you so much for watching this video. If you're checking in for the first time, please consider subscribing. I do videos like this, race videos, dynos, reviews, all sorts of cool stuff on cars. I also write an article, which I'll link below and I mentioned before, for Alt Driver, so please follow me, altdriver.com. As always, have a wonderful day, and I will see you next video.